President Trump's peace plan for Gaza hitting a snag. Israel.
Israel rejects the 15-point plan. I heard that there were those who said, "You didn't say it," but we did say it, and here I am saying it again.
So Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu demanding the full disarmament of Hamas before his troops withdraw from the Strip. It's a risky move in an already fractured relationship, breaking with Trump in a time where support for Israel is already dwindling in the U.S. I want to bring in CNN's Jeremy Diamond in Jerusalem. And Jeremy, let's just start. Netanyahu is facing re-election this October. Why do you think he spoke so forcefully on this now?
Well, if you just look at what happened in basically the 10 days between when President Trump announced this as a historic kind of monumental step towards establishing peace and security for the region, and when the Israeli prime minister said he rejected this plan outright, what you saw in between was pretty widespread rejection of this disarmament plan by various corners of the Israeli political spectrum, but in particular, the right-wing members of Netanyahu's own government, including the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, his finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who both said very clearly that they wanted to bring this up for a vote, that they wanted this plan to be rejected out of hand. And then you have the Israeli prime minister at a meeting of his government yesterday saying those very same words, saying Israel rejects the 15-point document that is this roadmap that was agreed to between the Board of Peace and Hamas that would lay out a pathway for Hamas to ultimately be disarmed, as long as Israel also takes certain steps, including stopping its strikes in the Gaza Strip, moving its troops back to the Yellow Line as agreed to back in October, and then eventually having a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops. Now, Hamas has responded to this. Bassem Naim, a member of Hamas's political bureau, saying that we expect the mediators and the American guarantor to pressure Netanyahu and his government to adhere to the roadmap and not obstruct the process for internal political and electoral reasons. But it is important to note that it is not completely black and white, and that's because we've learned of already, and we've seen some changes already in Gaza in terms of Israeli strikes that have significantly decreased. An Israeli source had told us that now targeted killings need to be approved at the highest levels of Israel's military in order to move forward. And a Board of Peace official is echoing some of that, saying that while politics are certainly accentuating things right now in Israel, that we are, quote, seeing cooperation behind the scenes. That from a Board of Peace official suggesting that while Israel is publicly rejecting this, they're at least cooperating with certain aspects behind the scenes. Audie.
Okay, that's Jeremy Diamond from Jerusalem. Thank you so much.
Joining us now is David Sanger, CNN politics and national security analyst and author of New Cold Wars, China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West. David, it's so good to see you. Thank you for joining us. First, want to ask you about
Great
Israel.
to be with you, Kristen.
Israel has, and Israel, topic du jour, has rejected America's latest peace proposal. Gaza under a ceasefire remains very dangerous, a very violent place. So what is the next step to deliver a peace deal? And would a rift between Trump and Netanyahu get in the way?
You know, this is a pretty remarkable rift because they go out of their way to make the case that they are fully in sync. And yet on Gaza, they really have not been since the day when the president went out to sign the initial accord that got the hostages back and ended that conflict, or at least ended that stage of it. And the president declared that, you know, a new age had arrived and so forth. And he had to drag Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, to that. Now Mr. Netanyahu is engaged in a pretty tough re-election campaign. He's trying to sew up the right-wingers who have supported his government. And he basically just said, no, this does not amount to what he called a real disarmament.
For more on this, I want to bring in Mayrov Zonshine. She is a senior Israel analyst with the International Crisis Group. Good morning, first of all, to you. Thank you so much for being on. I'm so interested in understanding Prime Minister Netanyahu's calculus here in saying that Israel would not agree, would not abide, would reject that 15-point roadmap that has been laid out by President Trump. He was obviously under a great deal of domestic pressure, but it's a hugely unusual move to break, of course, with his most important ally. How did he come to this decision?
It's good to be with you, Selma. I mean, we should look at what has happened since Trump forced a ceasefire on Netanyahu in Gaza in October 2025. Netanyahu hasn't actually he hasn't embraced the Trump 20-point plan. He hasn't implemented the obligations that Israel is under in the first phase. I mean, Hamas gave back the hostages, and Israel was supposed to start allowing aid to go in. Now, Israel constantly boasts that the aid that's going in is enough, but Gaza is still closed, and the humanitarian situation there is horrible. And so Israel hasn't even implemented. So that's the reality on the ground of what's happening now. What Netanyahu says, as you say, can suit his political domestic needs at the time. So certainly, as long as he's prime minister, I don't think we're going to see any kind of withdrawal of troops in Gaza. Israel currently controls over 50% of Gaza, and then it has extended that control to something like 70%. And so Netanyahu is trying to say, I'm not going to be forced to do any of this. And I think the U.S. knows, and I've spoken to officials on the ground here who say, we don't expect Netanyahu to do anything as long until the election. So what they're saying, what Netanyahu is saying, what Trump is saying is quite different than what's happening on the ground. On the ground, for example, we do see that there has been a scaling back of strikes in Gaza. That doesn't mean that it's come to a complete halt. But Israel has been doing many targeted assassinations, and those have been scaled back in the last few days. So even though Netanyahu will say that he's not adopting the plan, I think in reality, there is a certain amount of U.S. pressure to scale back strikes.
So you say that you don't believe or you don't see Netanyahu actually pulling back from Gaza while he remains in office. But if he's not going to go with the Board of Peace plan, what is the alternative end game for Gaza? Does, as you just mentioned, that occupation continue of Israeli troops just furthermore, or is there a plan here?
I mean, I think for Netanyahu, it's clear that he promised a total victory over Hamas. He promised that Hamas would no longer exist in Gaza, and his right-wing flank in the government has promised that Gazans would what they call voluntary immigration, but in reality, forcible expulsion, that they would build settlements in Gaza. And so this is the line. It's between the status quo that we have now and much further aggressive tactics to get them to leave. I don't see Israel relinquishing its power unless forced to, certainly in this government, possibly also in a different government after the election. So this is the situation, and it's similar to what's happening in Lebanon. The U.S. Forced Israel into a ceasefire. There are troops in South Lebanon. They've kind of frozen the situation. They're trying to keep it, as under control as possible, but they're not actually forcing Israel to do that much. The same here. Israel is basically being forced to kind of just be quieter about it, but not actually take any real meaningful steps. And if you noticed what happened with the Board of Peace in recent days, there was this announcement of a Hamas disarmament plan. There was an expectation that certain Israeli troops withdrawal would start to happen in parallel to certain actions by Hamas. But then all of a sudden, Mladenov met with Netanyahu, Trump met with Netanyahu, and now we don't hear anything about a withdrawal being required before Hamas fully disarms. And I think anybody who understands anything about decommissioning weapons understand that this is a long process, and it's not going to be that Hamas is going to disarm tomorrow and all of a sudden everything will be fine.
Israel has rejected President Trump's plan when it comes to Gaza. Israel is saying, look, the Hamas has to completely disarm before they pull out. Hamas is saying you have to pull out before we disarm. And he is stuck with these two factions still going at it. What, in this scenario, do you think is the best way to end this? And what is your concern about how the president has been dealing with what has been going on in Gaza, between Israel and Gaza?
Well, you're correct, Sarah. And he's doing it with an October election in the offing. So that I think this is going to be a real difficult situation. I think the 15-point plan the president offered was really dead on arrival from the start. There wasn't buy-in from Israel. There wasn't buy-in from Hamas. And ultimately, what these things have to do to be resolved is what he didn't do in the beginning. We've got to bring in partners in the region. We've got to bring in people internationally to come and enforce anything that's going to be, agreed upon. But right now, there's no expectation that Hamas will really give up all their weapons. There's no expectation that Israel will unilaterally cede that territory they've had. particularly with the elections coming.